right, hello everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. My name is Seth, and I'm back here again with Ryan, and he's kind of our historian guru. He kind of comes up with these really fun stories and really interesting conspiracy theories. And as you know, we've been doing a little series with him regarding conspiracy theories and secret combinations. And in this story, in this episode, we are going to discuss how one of the biggest Christian denominations may be contributing to the number one killer of Americans, which is heart disease. All right. So Ryan,
Fantastic.
why
Well,
don't you
this
go
is
ahead and introduce us to this idea? What is going on here?
it's so fun and it's so wild, Seth. I got to tell you. Now, this is episode 2 of our conspiracy series here.
Yeah.
We got a third one coming up. I guess that one of the best ways to introduce this first, I'll tell you, I've had a background in the movement arts and athletics and nutrition for the last 20 years. I've been a professional in this industry. I've taught in dance, martial arts, and Olympic fencing. Some of my favorite things to do in the world. Fortunately, all got shut down during COVID, and I haven't been really doing it ever since. But I still love the subject and I study it. I've been following it, and you may be following this too, because RFK Jr. has been confirmed as the Director of Health and Human Services. Definitely a big upgrade from the previous one. Right? So RFK Jr. He's going to do well. I got to tell you, I don't necessarily trust the guy.
Okay.
He's had some interesting politics. He's definitely had very disparaging remarks against conservatives in the past. But I tell you what, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't care what his opinion is, and this goes for anybody in government. I don't care what their opinion is or how they conduct their personal life. If they're not breaking laws and they're doing a good job in government, I'm rooting for them. I want RFK to be as successful as he possibly can be, and I'm rooting for that possibility. And one of the things that has recently been done is the banning of red dye number 3. Now, this is just an introduction to a bigger picture. I want to show you something. Red dye number 3 was banned because it was deemed unhealthy to consume. It was actually originally banned in the 1980s in cosmetics. So way back 40 years ago, scientists were already saying, this is not good even to put on your skin, but yet for the last 40 years, we've been ingesting it. Now, what if I were to tell you that even that is a lie?
That's a lie. So red dye isn't
all of
bad
it's a
for you.
lie. It is bad for you.
Okay. So
But it wasn't that it was originally banned in the 1980s, and it wasn't that it was just banned recently. No. Red dye number 3 was originally banned by the Food and Drug Act of 1957.
Oh, okay. So much earlier.
Okay. Much earlier. We've known about this for half a century or more. And yet it has been continually allowed to be in our diet system. And you want to know why? You want to know why we've been able to continue to consume toxic coal tar food dyes? Because of maraschino cherries.
Okay. Because they're that bright red color. Okay.
That bright red color. Those are made with red dye number 3, or at least they have been. They're not now. But back in the 1950s, this was banned. And the cherry industry, and by the way, that's not a cherry. It shouldn't be classified as food. It's a concoction of chemicals, and it's a Frankenstein thing. You shouldn't have it anywhere near your food. And this is actually my biggest contention with food companies like Chick-fil-A, because they're always putting those red cherries on top of milkshakes and on ice cream. Right.
Right. Yeah.
Terrible for you. It's toxic. Look, the maraschino cherry company went to the government and lobbied them and said, hey, if you have us ban this dye, we represent this much of this local economy. It's going to affect the economy very badly. I know you don't want your administration to be responsible for having this economy sink. So give us a reprieve. Allow us time to find an alternative dye, and we'll do that. So the federal government said, sure, we'll give you a reprieve. Go ahead and find an alternative. And for the next so many years, the cherry company had no incentive and no oversight to get them to find an alternative. And so we have been importing and creating this toxic dye and putting it in our food ever since.
So they never found it. I mean, that's just the efficiency of the government for you, right? Like they come up with this idea, and then it's been like 80 years
Yeah.
now or however long it's been. But
So you got health people out there. You've got even medical doctor YouTube channels saying this is a great thing. This is a great win for American health system. It's not. It's a lie. This has been ongoing for decades now, and it should have been taken care of a long time ago. This is just the next iteration of something that keeps getting passed down the road, and we're passing the buck along. We'll see how it works out, but this is not the only dye that has problems. And just to get into that a little bit more, many of these has been tied to behavioral disorders such as ADD, ADHD, and a whole bunch of other problems in children.
mm-hmm.
Many other countries, nations of the world, have already banned these other dyes, such as red 40, yellow 5, blue 1. And those countries have less than half the rates of behavioral disorders in their children. Now, the countries that use the most of these dyes are the United States, Central America, and South America, particularly Brazil. Guess what? They have the highest rates of behavioral disorders. Right?
Interesting. Okay.
So that's just
really
fun for your
interesting
audience.
because that's one of RFK's things is he totally wants to get to the bottom of why we have such a high rate of autism now as opposed to then, or all these other behavioral issues, he said. And I'm very hopeful because he says he's open to seeing the science and stuff. He wants to do a study of it. But you're saying that we already know some stuff that we could get rid of and we just haven't yet.
Exactly.
So,
and it's really just the tip of the iceberg. I bring it up only because it's relevant. It's just recently been in the news, but this is a part of a much bigger issue because the major killers of Americans come from cultural diseases in that they're not had in other parts of the world, but they're really common in the United States. And these are things like dementia, cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Heart disease being the number one killer. Now, here's a question for you. When did heart disease become an issue in the United States, become a major issue and a killer of Americans?
Wow.
It was actually,
probably
we have a guess.
I would guess around the, well, it has to be around processed foods around that time, right? So that would probably be around the 80s, I would say, or the 70s. Is that
pretty
about
close?
Right?
Pretty
Okay.
close. We actually need to take it back a little bit further. It was in the 1950s, early
1950s.
1950s.
TV dinners,
right.
I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me introduce you to somebody named Ansel Keys. This was a researcher, a medical professional. He came up with K rationings during World War II, basically the precursor to MREs, the prepackaged meals we send out to soldiers. So he did a lot. He did some really good things. He also was noticing that heart disease was becoming a major issue in the United States, and he made some observations, and he did a little bit of science, and he's like, maybe we cut out meat and fat from our diets, and we introduce kind of a Mediterranean diet. That's where the Mediterranean diet comes from, is Ansel Keys, right?
Oh, okay.
And so this started taking hold in the American culture, and the consumer started demanding low-fat products. So this is where we get skim milk from. It's where we get low-fat yogurt from, and other products that have reduced fat or no fat in them. And at the same time, we were reducing our intake of beef, eggs, and chicken. So if those were the real issues causing so many problems in American health, how is it that when we started taking these things out of our diets in the 1950s, did we end up worse today than we were back then?
Yeah, so there's something's up. What's
Something's
going on
up.
here?
Conspiracy, right? Yeah. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
So now, building off of what we know about Ansel Keys, let's add another piece to the puzzle. This is a 3-part series. So Ansel Keys was number 1. I'm going to introduce you to the second part now, and this is Alexander Fleming. Fleming was a researcher who came up with broad-spectrum antibiotics in the late 1920s. Antibiotics started proliferating in the United States 10 years later, 1937. They were used heavily during World War II, after which they started becoming mainstream. So by 1950, you have broad-spectrum antibiotics being used, and many people in the United States have been exposed to some form of them at this time, either from infections that they have had treated at the hospital directly, or from the poultry and meat that they've been eating animals that have been exposed to these
Oh,
antibiotics.
okay.
Okay. And when did I say heart disease started to become a problem in the US?
You said in the 50s.
1950s.
Yes.
At the same time.
Okay, interesting.
Right? So this is what Ansel Keys was missing. By the way, both of these guys were atheists. I think it's important as we look at our history and the values of the people who shaped history, we understand where they're coming from an intellectual basis. Who's influencing them? What is there? Is it a religion that's influencing a government, an ideology, whatever it may be? It's valuable to know that information. So both these guys are atheists, and they're making these generalizations or creating things that they don't really understand the full effect of. Now, I'm going to take a second here. I would very much love to give your audience more health ideas, more health information, not advice, but
Okay.
ideas to
All
consider.
right.
Right? I'm not a doctor, so but these are some great ideas that you're not going to get from your doctor, from a dietitian or a nutritionist, largely because they don't know it. So I'm going to give you a secret here. This is very cool stuff. It can change your life. What causes heart disease? The major issues are things like stress, cortisol, which is a hormone, stress hormone, lack of sleep, sedentary lifestyle, and a buildup of unregulated cholesterol in the bloodstream.
Yes.
Okay, what's cholesterol? Cholesterol was one of the things that's been demonized by researchers like Ansel Keys through the 1960s, right? So we want to get rid of our cholesterol, right? If you're going to have an egg, you want to remove the yolk from it, just eat the whites of the egg. You want to eat less meat. You want to pull fats out of products. And not have these fats going through your system. That was the idea. And yes, it did in fact reduce somewhat the amounts of cholesterol in the body. And yet the American individual, the American citizen, became more fat, more unhealthy, was subject to more debilitating diseases like diabetes, cancer, and dementia in later years. So there's something missing to this, right? So what I want you to understand is cholesterol is an essential part of nutrition. Cholesterol is essential for making hormones in the body, particularly testosterone.
Yeah.
And also it's a pretty common element that makes your brain, like your brain is made up of cholesterol.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are two of the other big issues in America right now? One of them is dementia, which is a literal eating away of your brain. And the other is a declining birth rate because of our fertility rates have been decreasing since when? Since the 1960s. So all of this seems to be tied to the amount of cholesterol in the diet that we've been pulling out of the diet since the 1950s. Cholesterol, to manage cholesterol effectively, we've now discovered has largely to do with your liver enzymes, your bile salts, and these are regulated by your microgut biome. And what do broad spectrum antibiotics kill?
It would kill off all your microbiome.
Everything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And some of these microbiomes that are very healthy and very good for you are very susceptible to this. And there's a bunch of different ways you can be exposed to antibiotics. One, directly, because you get an infection, you go to the hospital, you have a surgery, you're getting antibiotics. And whether that was recently or years ago, it's still affecting you today because you have to replace those microbes at some point. And there's a bunch of different kinds. It's not just one kind of biome of microbe that you need. There's a bunch of different kinds, and they all do different things. Your gut microbiome controls all kinds of things in the body. It controls mood. It controls behavior. It regulates the body's functions, including muscle growth hormone, other hormones. It regulates your sleep. It affects really anything that has to do with your ability to function in the world can be affected because of your gut microbiome. And what I want to point out with this is that there's a connection between the brain and the rest of the body. It's called your mind-body connection. The mind is not simply what's in your head, in your skull, right? That's your brain, and the brain communicates with your microgut biome. And if you get like a concussion, you've caused brain damage that can affect the function of your body, right?
Uh-huh.
Likewise, if you've killed off microbes in your body that are essential for function and communication with the brain, it's kind of like you've received a brain damage,
Hmm.
but it's in your gut.
Interesting. Like a memory of your body.
Truly. And there's so many interesting cases where people have been cured of depression simply because they fixed their gut.
Interesting.
Okay. And that's just one example. There's so many more. And this has been a missing piece of the puzzle for so long. It's this understanding of microbials in the gut and this mind-body connection that really involves all of the functioning of your body. It's also interesting to consider, on another note, how this mind-body connection and gut health can influence your spiritual connected and spiritual awareness.
That's an interesting thing that I've thought about quite a lot because, I mean, if you think about it, there is no other way for us to receive revelation except through our bodies as
Right.
we're in our bodies.
Yep, exactly. And it's all a chemical jigsaw puzzle, right? And it works together in a very specific way. So, to control not cortisol, cholesterol, thank you. To control cholesterol in the body, you have to have a healthy gut. You have to have all of the correct microbes in your system. If you've been exposed to processed foods that have a lot of emulsifiers or preservatives in them, these act as mild antibiotics as well. So
Because
there's
they're
all
just
different
like
kinds of
these
ways.
toxic chemicals, right? They're
Exactly. Yeah. They're meant to keep the food from spoiling. Well, it's having the same effect in your gut by killing off microbes from causing spoilage. All right. So
that makes sense. Yes.
That gives you a kind of a general understanding of health, of what we know today, and how we got there. So what's causing heart disease in America? It's a lack of understanding about cholesterol and how we manage it through proper bile ducts, through the bile salts in the liver, being managed through proper healthy gut microbe, and yes, some regulation of the intake of cholesterol. You don't want to be just chugging down a bunch of meat and dairy and high cholesterol foods.
Yeah.
That would be silly. But you also need to be feeding that gut biome with things like vegetables, and fermented vegetables are one of the best ways to get what you need to feed your gut. And this is going to help control cholesterol and thus prevent heart disease. But it's not the only issue. Because when Ansel Keys came around with his idea, he was missing, of course, the fact that broad-spectrum antibiotics were a factor, but what was also not taken into account in the food industry was that you can't simply remove something from the food without replacing it. And what did they replace it with? They replaced it with sugar.
Oh wait. So what did they remove in the foods that they replaced?
Fat.
Oh, okay. So
Yes,
they're removing
the fats
like
and cholesterols, right?
Okay.
And they replaced them with different types of fats, particularly seed oils, vegetable oils, and sugars, particularly sugars that were cheap because they were being subsidized by the federal government.
Yeah.
Once again, we're back to that, right? So that would be corn syrup, right? And it's been estimated that the average American citizen cellular makeup contains about 70 to 75% corn molecules.
Wow.
That's how much
corn,
corn is in our diet. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. We're just flooded with corn because it's subsidized from there. It's an artificial monopoly, and we're supposed to be protected by those things, but it's another subject, right?
Yeah.
We could get into. So the last piece of the puzzle, what happened that contributed to all these other health problems in the US? Well, it started with the first dietary guidelines of the United States, which were introduced in 1980. Okay. Yeah. And some of you might remember the old food pyramid.
Yes. Yes, I remember.
Right? It's since been phased out, and we have a new one. Anybody know what that is?
Well, I don't recall that what it looks like exactly, but I do know that there's a new one.
There's a new one, and it's called the My Plate.
Okay,
right?
That sounds
These
good,
two things. We're going to put them side by side because what we want to do is we're trying to show, on the one hand, the food pyramid emphasized grains in the diet.
That's right. Yeah.
And it limited meat, right? Building off of what Ansel Keys' ideas were, possibly, maybe something more there. But as we migrate into the My Plate, meat is no longer on that chart. There is no meat. It's just protein, and it doesn't specify what kind of protein.
Which is
Particularly
important.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Right. Now, the American Food Dietary Guidelines were interesting. They were promoted by the federal government. It was a whole new program put out by the federal government. But who influenced the federal government in the decisions they made as to what they were going to put on this chart? Who influenced what the guidelines were going to be?
A good question.
Let me introduce you to the Seventh-day Adventists. Right? And this is a very odd connection. Most people wouldn't think. This is impossible. There's no way that government would be working with a religious organization. There's a separation of church and state, isn't there? Right?
Yeah.
No, there isn't actually. There never has been. Not really. Not when it counts. Not when it matters. Because all these people are very religious. America has always been a Protestant country. John Harvey Kellogg.
Yeah.
Throw a picture of him up here too. Yeah, so you've got beef with them. I'm not surprised. Anybody who has heard about this guy's know he is something. He's a piece of work, right? So he's heavily into the Seventh-day Adventist religion, and he oversaw one of their clinics. It was a major facility that people would go to as a wellness clinic. People would go to, kind of like a spa.
Interesting.
But he was into genital mutilation, child abuse, eugenics. He was a Nazi sympathizer, just all around terrible. I like to think I try to cultivate a Christ-like attitude for all people. This guy, I'm just not there yet, maybe, but this guy
very messed up. I would
really
absolutely
awful,
agree
really
with
awful.
you. Just the ethics involved with the things that he did and how he's influenced our culture so profoundly in a number of ways, not just in the things that you're going to be talking about, but in a very large number of stupid things that we've done. Anyway, you proceed.
So many things. I'm glad that we're on the same page with this.
Yeah.
So he invented cereal.
Yes.
Okay? He's generally regarded as the inventor of processed grains that became cereal. Why did he invent them? He was trying to create a food, kind of like certain Catholic monks in earlier generations, I think 1500s or something, were creating foods that were bland, deliberately bland and tasteless, and actually lacking nutrition because of the processing of them. And this was in order to keep people from sinning, right? Let's not stimulate the senses in
particularly
any way.
Sexual sin, because that was what they were obsessed with, apparently,
Yep.
especially with this Kellogg guy. So
exactly. And where does this idea come from? Just a recap on the origins of the Seventh-day Adventists and where this guy was influenced from. So there was I always forget her first name, but her last name's White, so I'll just call her Miss White. She was hit on the head violently as a child, and she was in a coma for quite a long time. She suffered a major brain injury that caused her to have epileptic episodes for the rest of her life.
Oh, yeah.
Or most of her life. It tends to fade out after menopause for some reason. But 19th century doctors didn't understand epilepsy very well. And one of the key signs of an epileptic is prolific writing. She wrote tons of stuff. And her followers, she was an offshoot of a religion that had failed. She kind of gathered in some of the remainers of those followers, reorganized the church in a different way. And her writings became scripture.
Okay.
And one of the things that she emphasized were things like a plant-based diet. Okay. So in comes Kellogg, and he's creating these cereals, these processed grains that are not designed to be unstimulating, but they are very much in line with the Adventist doctrine of having a diet that's largely based in plants.
Right.
Okay. So that's how we get cereal. Now you'll notice that all the cereals on the market, every one of them, says this is part of a complete breakfast. In other words, they're not meant to be a standalone meal. But if you're anything like me and how I grew up in a family with 4 kids and we didn't have a whole lot of extra money, cereal was kind of the go-to for a meal.
Yeah.
And it is not nutritious. It is not healthy.
By itself, apparently. but it's
Not by
calorie
itself, it
dense,
is.
that's
Yeah,
for sure. So
certainly calorie dense, right? And so I lived off of that, and that's why I mean you can contribute cereal for one to many of the problems that children face today in behavioral disorders, attention disorders, and even general development disorders, including physical development, like maybe their eyes aren't very good or they're not as good as they should be, right? This can all come down to nutrition, and because we can tie it easily back to the prevalency of cereal in the food industry. It's not meant to be. It's not real food. And I can point this out. And there's a number of cereals like Cheerios that'll have heart healthy labels on them. Seth, have you ever wondered how they get those labels, what they have to pass to get that?
I didn't think about that. No, I've seen those, though. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So basically what scientists do, researchers, they'll take the cereal and they'll compare its nutritional content to a piece of white bread. And if it is better than the white bread, it is heart healthy.
Oh, okay. That's a weird step. Yeah, okay. So if it's healthier than bread, so meaning what exactly? That it just doesn't have as much fat and sugar in it, or?
It could be a variety of things. Generally, cereals are sprayed with a little bit of vitamins. They're not very good vitamins. They tend to be cheap, but that alone is enough to make them a little bit better than a piece of white bread that's processed and doesn't really have any nutritional value. Right, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So that's where that comes from. It's just to point out our health industry is super messed up, and there's all kinds of juicy conspiracy surrounding why.
Right? Yeah, like if you get to the bottom of it, it's actually interesting. So
right. Okay, so that was a bit of an aside, but it brings us forward to today. The Seventh-day Adventists have long been known as fairly healthy people. Now, isn't it interesting that, I think you brought this up earlier, that you have Latter-day Saints and you can put them side by side with Adventists. And most research that I've found, articles that I've read on the subject, seem to say that they're comparable, and Latter-day Saints might be even a little bit better.
In terms of what now?
Of health, of
in
overall
terms of
health.
Okay.
Yeah, the lowest instances of cancer. Well, diabetes tends to be a problem with Latter-day Saints, actually, even though they have less cancer and less heart disease.
Yes, we love our Diet Cokes and our sodas. Yeah.
But length of life, quality of life, they tend to be pretty comparable. But you don't hear about Latter-day Saints in these studies very often. No. And Seventh-day Adventists tend to be propped up as these bastions of health and fitness and wellness. That's a scam. That's all a scam. It's all marketing.
They definitely have a reputation for, like, for some reason, they have the reputation for being the healthy ones, the healthy religion, while as, the Latter-day Saints, who also have a health code, we're not. No, we're just the weirdos who don't drink coffee and tea.
Yeah, it's because we don't advertise it. We're not trying to make a buck off of it. The Seventh-day Adventist organization is very much a business. They have assets in hospitals and in wellness centers and in supplements and books and all kinds of things. And it's a huge industry, and it has made them one of the most influential and powerful religions on the continent.
In terms of health.
Additionally, they fund their own studies. And the doctors of the Adventists who are making these health claims often have conflicts of interest. And so it's this kind of behavior and prominence, affluence that they've created for themselves that allowed them to be able to influence the U.S. federal government in its dietary guidelines. And one of the key principles of those dietary guidelines is a vegetarian diet. And so my pyramid has a little section for meat. And when we moved forward a few years into my plate, we have a section that says protein and no meat. There's no meat on that at all.
Just protein. Yeah.
Just protein. Yeah. Huh. So that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we see that these dietary guidelines have been heavily influenced by the Adventists' doctrine. And is that a problem? We should ask. Well, their doctrine is very similar to the Word of Wisdom.
Yeah.
But I would say and have argued that it is very much an anti-Word of Wisdom.
Interesting. How is that?
Well, for one, they have the same ideas about not consuming tobacco, alcohol. They even avoid coffee and tea. What they do focus on, though, is this abundance of grains and plant-based diets. Now, you cannot get certain nutrition from a plant-based diet. You can't get B1 and B12.
Hmm.
These are animal products. They're essential for nerve function and nerve development. And actually, a number of conditions, including SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, has been linked to a deficiency in vitamin B1. Yeah. So this can be very devastating if the diet is not done properly. And additionally, the Adventists have not done a whole lot to distinguish what types of grains you're getting. The word of wisdom is pretty clear. In context of the time period, these are fully unprocessed grains that have the full spectrum of nutrition intact. Right? It's very important distinction there.
Yeah.
And so you could be eating potato chips laced with a bunch of seed oils and vegetable oils that are carcinogenic and really not good for you. You could be eating French fries that have been cooked in oil that has been cooked over and over and over and over again at high heats, oxidizing the oil, creating all kinds of free radicals. And they called one of the byproducts of superheated oils, processed oils, is trans fat, which is the worst for your heart health. And yet you could be living a Seventh-day Adventist diet because it's all plant-based. A number of things were introduced to our general well-being, health, and food industry during the 20th century. Antibiotics, which were not well understood, and the effects, the long-lasting effects that they have on people. The observations of cholesterol in the diet and how we can fix that by reducing it, this causing the influx of more sugars into our diet, and then the taking advantage of situations by organizations claiming to be a religious organization, but operating like a business, partnering with the U.S. Health Department, the U.S. government, and they've also partnered with the World Health Organization, which has been labeled a transnational criminal organization and money laundering scheme, by the way. And so they're all connected. And so this one religious entity has had massive effects, making an otherwise manageable health situation much worse in America. Of course, it's all connected. It's all building off of each other. But, they continue to spread abroad with their influence. And they're allowed to do so because it's popular. And a lot of people are getting money for it. And they have, at least in this case, the World Health Organization partnered up with them in order to take advantage of their medical facilities they have all over the world. Still, it's a criminal organization, and you have this religious entity working with it. It's these massive conflicts of interests. They are places where religion should have no business, yet they're making all of the decisions.
I see.
And imagine what the general public would think if the LDS Church started pushing its values and ideals and dietary guidelines on the general public.
Yeah, I mean, there would be outrage, right?
Yeah. So there's the conspiracy for you,
Yeah.
right? And I guess just to tie it in, it's fascinating to look at history through the lens of its influences. Where are we getting the most of our influence? And we forget, it's so easy to forget that America is a Christian nation, this Christian nation, right? One of the last on earth, the largest Christian nation on earth. And we forget that everything that has happened along our history has been because of a religious ideal.
As well, yeah. The good and the bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's all I got for you.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. If you haven't already, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to share this with other people who you think might be interested. And thank you so much for watching. And until next time, bye.
Bye-bye.